Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining me for True Scary Stories by the Candlelight. Tonight, I'll be telling 10 true scary stories that are by my candlelight. As I get a little adjusted here. Now, I won't be able to do, funny voices and stuff like that. So, I did proofread some of these, so, hopefully I won't stutter too much or stutter at all. And, I don't think this is going to be like a volume type thing. I don't have any like ambient sounds and stuff like that. You may hear some clinking in the background, but I don't have any control over that. But anyways, I believe without further ado, I don't want to make this a long introduction. And as again, these are true scary stories by the Candlelight. And I will be also numbering my stories, so you won't probably see like a number 1 or after I get done story number 2, number 3, unlike others out there that tell these kind of stories. So with that being said, my volume is all the way up, and hopefully that you all can hear me. So without further ado, we shall begin. Story number 1. Imaginary Friend. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend who lived in this massive antique dresser. I vividly remember him telling me stories, although I have absolutely no recollection of what they actually were. I remember one day talking to my parents about it. Dad traveled quite a bit, so he wasn't up to date with what I was into. And when I started telling him about my dresser buddy, he wanted to know his name. It was something innocent like Peter, but I can still see him going white in the face as I told him. I then drew a picture of Peter for him. The very next day, my dad and my uncle took out the dresser and burned it. It wasn't until a few years later when I found out my dad's little brother, my uncle, also had the same friend with the same name who lived in the same antique dresser. After a few months of the typical imaginary friend stuff, my uncle started having night terrors and couldn't sleep because of Peter. It got so bad that they had to move him out of his room before he managed to get back to normal. Story number 2. Cabin in the Woods. The first time I moved away from home, I lived in an old cabin-like house that I rented really cheap. I never had a good night's sleep in there. I always tossed and turned and woke up to several times during the night. But it wasn't until after a few weeks things started to get weird. In the beginning, it was just small things that I didn't really think too much about, like keys missing and cups and plates not being where I thought I had left them. Then I started waking up in the morning to find various drawers opened and things laying around like someone had been in a hurry searching for something. I even came home to a wide open main door and decided to change the locks. But even then, when I was home with the door locked, I could walk past and just in the corner of my eye see the door slide open. One time I was cat sitting of one of my friend's cats, and it would just sit for hours in the middle of the room and toss its little tail from side to side and watch as if it was following something around the room with its eyes. Creeped me out. If you can only imagine what it felt like to see that the cat slowly following something that floats randomly around the room and finally stop right beside you. After a while, I could just not live there anymore and finally moved out. Story number 3. The disconnected number. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every night. He would answer it, and this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then a week later or so it began again. The exact same noise, exact same time. Finally, one day he decided to back dial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer it, would call a few more times. No messages were left. He decided to say screw it, ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. You guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time he was terrified every night. Unsure why this was happening, he back dialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time he lost his job and his phone. The call stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. One day, my mom asked me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother, and he was freaking out. He back dialed the number again, and it said the number was disconnected this time. Never heard from it after that. Story number 4. The handprint. Heard a tapping on my window at night. Next morning, there was a handprint on the outside of my window. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. Story number 5. Don't turn away. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping and gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. Driving back on a dirt road in about 30 miles per hour, give or take 5 miles per hour, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, passenger side, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't!" I completely froze. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, then completely stopped when I heard a tap, tap on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I don't know what was going on and thought it was over till our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me," and "Don't." Turn away over and over. Then I heard it again, tap, tap. But from the window behind me, it was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and sighed. It was quiet beside the truck in the road. He looked at me and said, "Well, we will ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so the evil will forget our faces." Navajo to English equivalent, I remembered curling up on the seat and just staring at the radio, watching the time, listening to my uncle sing an old prayer till we got to my grandmother's house. Story number 7. The Man in the Top Hat. When I was growing up, one of my best friends told me about a very creepy situation involving him, his younger brother, and a man in the window. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They're some years apart, but this younger brother was born with a multitude of different health issues, including multiple sclerosis, and he's confined to a wheelchair and cannot care for himself. So, to keep an eye on him overnight, when his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night, my friend randomly woke up for no in particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed something very startling. A strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat looking in through the window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the light on, then ran into his parents' room to tell them what he saw. When his parents came back into their room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure. A few of his family members say it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night. My friend believes it was death, but it's all still pretty unsettling to me. Story number 8. The old piano. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in the South Louisiana. One of my places we went was Myrtle's Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something. I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard a couple of times, I started to look around for the source of the noise. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it, so I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said, "There it is again," and that they must have heard it. They thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me and then at her ear. With a questioning look, I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there and that he played the piano, and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly don't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she had heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it. Story number 9. The Light. My wife's mother passed away in 2003 from cancer. After the funeral, family and friends gathered at her house for a final celebration of her life. The gathering went late into the evening. My son, 3 at the time, needed to go to bed at that point. I walked with him up to the stairs to where he would sleep. The room that my mother in law passed away in was upstairs and straight down the hallway as you reached the top of the landing. My son and I walked upstairs together with me holding his hand. As we nearly reached the top of the stairs, my son stopped and wouldn't move. At the point which he could just see down the hallway, he was staring straight down the hall. I looked at him, then down the hall to an open doorway to a completely dark bedroom. He just stared and would not move any further. I asked him, "Buddy, are you okay?" His responses was, "Daddy, the light. The light scares me." I looked again down the hallway where he was staring into the darkness. "Buddy, you see a light?" "Yes, Daddy, it scares me." I promptly picked him up and went back downstairs. To this day, the hairs still stand on the back of my neck when I think of it. Story number 10. How lucky you are. Spring break of 2010, my buddies and I decided to camp out on an island at a local lake. One night, as we are cooking food and drinking beer, a canoe floats by with one guy in it. He asks how we were doing, and we invite him to our island for grilled meat and beers. Being in South Arkansas, whichever you prefer, we naturally assume that everyone is friendly and wants to hang out. His name was Kurt, and he was super friendly but really seemed to be sad. We asked him what was up, and he replied, "Oh, nothing really. It's just that my friends are probably worried about me." He looked at me and winked. "They'll find out soon enough." That still haunts to this day. Everyone liked Kurt and noticing that it was getting dark and we had been drinking. We offered to let him stay with us that night. He declined, saying that he had to get to where he was going, and he seemed very adamant about that. I asked where he was headed, thinking maybe you could give him a ride or on a jet ski or something. Kurt ignored the question and said, "You boys don't know how lucky you are." He hopped on his canoe and left. We didn't think much about it. The next morning, we woke up early to do some fishing. As we were fishing, a police boat pulls up. The officer asked if we were a part of the search party that found the body. We obviously have no clue what he is talking about, so he tells us a story about a young man in a canoe that disappeared last week. Apparently, divers found his body at the bottom of the lake 2 days before. The young man's name was Kirk Clark. This was so freaky for us that we all packed up and left camp that day. So, with that being said, as I said, I was only going to tell 10 of them. That was the 10th one. I don't want to keep continuing. And almost got 20 minutes on here. Now I got 20. But I hope you enjoyed those stories. But I will continue back up as I got leave my last story in this one. We've got about 25 more stories to go in this packet, so about probably 15 more to go. So I'll continue those back up whenever it is that I can. But I do hope you enjoyed these ones as I told. But until then, I gotta go for now. Pleasant dreams.